Yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Florida.
Mr. President, I intend to be here for the next little bit under an hour. Look forward to sharing this time here on the floor with you to discuss some of the issues that are before us, particularly the pending issue before us of nominations and the concern we have about that. I know people back home across the country are kind of watching the news tonight, or perhaps over the last few weeks have watched the news about all of these things, and so they're wondering what this debate is about. So I want to use this opportunity here tonight to address the nomination of Cornelia Pillard for the D.C. Circuit, because it's a good example of the government overreach that has impacted all sorts of issues in our lives. And I want to begin with this whole nomination issue, right? So let's lay the landwork here so people back home understand what's happening. So last week, or the week before last, or maybe the Senate majority, by a simple majority vote, they changed the practice of the Senate that had existed here since the beginning of the Senate. And they did so in an effort to grab more power for themselves and for the President. Basically, here's the precedent that's been set here and is exemplified by the nomination before us now. The precedent that's been established from now on is that any presidential nominee, except for the Supreme Court, at least for now, they're only going to need a simple majority vote to confirm them. And there's problems with that because in the Constitution it gives the Senate, wisely, the power to advise and consent. The reason why that was done, especially for judges, these are lifetime appointments. When someone is made a federal judge, it is for the rest of their lives, unless they're impeached, which is a rare occurrence, thankfully. And so this is now people that are going to serve for the rest of their lives or the rest of their working lives in and on the bench, making decisions about the application and interpretation of our federal laws. And that's why the Senate was given this extraordinary opportunity to vet these people and to look for a supermajority of votes in this chamber before someone is put in a position like that. The other positions, of course, are cabinet nominees and so forth, and those are very important as well. But by breaking the rules to change the rules of the Senate, something that, by the way, we were told at least on 2 occasions this year was not going to happen, but ultimately did, what we basically saw was the ramming through, just as Obamacare was on a party line vote, the President's nominees. And tonight's nominee is an example of that. This is going to have enormous consequences on this institution for sure. You're seeing it play out here tonight. And by the way, I say to my colleagues in the majority party, the history of this body is that power trades hands, and I believe that as early as November of next year, January of next year, when a new Congress reconvenes, you won't be in the majority. You'll be in the minority. And soon thereafter, there may be a Republican president, now appointing judges, now appointing cabinet members and other appointees. And now, all of a sudden, a simple majority is going to be enough. And you've set that precedent. But beyond the impact that that's going to have on this institution, it's going to have an impact on the country. It's going to have an impact of putting these activist judges, such as the nominee before us tonight, on the bench. It's going to have an impact on a wide range of issues, from Obamacare to the sanctity of life to the Second Amendment, just to name a few. Why does the majority want to pack this particular bench, this particular D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, with a supermajority? Why? Well, it's because it's a court that's often called the second highest court in the country. It's a court that's key in reviewing all these regulations that are being imposed upon us. It's a court that's key in reviewing all these assertions of executive power that this president and other presidents have instituted. The current D.C. Circuit, as currently made up, it's proven to be somewhat of an obstacle to the big government agenda that the White House and the majority here in the Senate have been pursuing. And they don't like it. That's, by the way, why the majority leader earlier this year said we need at least one more, meaning judge, that will switch that majority on that court. Well, with that vote, that's by changing the rules, that's what they're setting up for here. And now they seek to expand it tonight or early tomorrow with a nominee that, quite frankly, is completely out of the mainstream. For example, Professor Pillard has said on the question of abortion, you know what she calls pregnancy? Conscription into maternity. That's a quote. I don't know what that means. But I bet you the vast majority of Americans would see that as outside the mainstream. By the way, as you look at the majority pulling out all these stops to confirm controversial nominations such as this one of someone who's completely outside the mainstream, and they do so despite the fact that they've spent much of the last 10 years basically filibustering some of former President Bush's, George W. Bush's, best nominations to the judiciary, especially to this D.C. Circuit. Let me give you some examples. Senate Democrats over the last 2 years, they basically refused to, over 2 years, they just refused to even give Peter Keisler a Judiciary Committee vote, despite his extraordinary credentials and a record of public service. You know, at the time they argued that, among other things, that maybe the D.C. Circuit wasn't busy enough to warrant some of filling these vacancies. He was just the most recent of several Republican nominees to the D.C. Circuit that the Senate Democrats blocked and filibustered. There were others. For example, they successfully filibustered Miguel Estrada. He was a Honduran-born legal superstar, a person who some said may one day be the first American of Hispanic descent to serve on as a Supreme Court justice. Senate Democrats voted 7 times, to filibuster this great story, this great American success story, and this great judge. Other nominees to the D.C. Circuit, including then California Supreme Court Justice Janice Roger Brown and Peter Kavanaugh, they also faced long delays, a failed cloture vote, and filibuster attempts, as did, by the way, President Bush's nominees all across the country. The numbers on this issue do not lie. Numbers are facts, and the numbers don't lie about the double standard that's been applied here today. For example, tonight's vote on Judge Pillard will come after just 190 days after her nomination. But for historical context, Senate Democrats, they obstructed now Chief Justice John Roberts' D.C. Circuit nomination by 729 days. Another impressive nominee, which I mentioned earlier, Mr. Kavanaugh, he took 1,036 days. Miguel Estrada was obstructed for 184 days. Janice Brown's nomination took 684 days. Tonight, 190 days. And on that, and similar cases, they've completely changed the rules of the Senate and how the Senate nominates people to a lifetime appointment to the second highest court in the land. But despite this record and despite the fact that the D.C. Circuit is still known to be underworked today, the majority presses ahead with what will be about a midnight or 1 a.m. vote to install a controversial law professor on the nation's second most important court. So what's changed? What caused the same people that used to routinely filibuster highly qualified judges? What's caused them to now come here and make these changes? What's changed is that now there's a Democrat in the White House. What's changed is they now want an ideologically compliant court. What they want is a liberal activist court, one that protects all the things they've rammed through Congress over the years and imposed through regulations and pushed through executive order. Now we know why Senate Democrats were less interested in the workload of the D.C. Circuit or the objective qualifications of the nominees over the past decade, why they were less concerned about that than they are today. Because their dreams came true of having a Democrat in the White House and a majority in the Senate, so their efforts to keep vacancies open that has brought us here today. That's what's brought us here today as they seek to fill them, in order to radically change the federal judiciary into their own image. But I think what's important to understand is that this whole effort here to start this debate about judges and all of that, it's really an effort to distract from another big government intrusion that everyone knows too well. That's Obamacare. Interestingly enough, this Sunday I was at a wedding. I was approached by someone who had a story similar to what my colleague from North Carolina just outlined. It was someone who had just actually, not even outside, this is outside Obamacare, so this is someone who has employee-provided care, but that's going to be impacted by these changes that are happening in the law. She'd just gotten notice that her premiums had gone up, but here what was worse. Her deductible had gone up to about $5,000 or $6,000. She doesn't have $5,000 or $6,000. And the way she quickly figured it out is she's going to have to spend $6,000 she doesn't even have before she can even begin to use the health insurance plan that she can barely afford. She's basically uninsured. But I wish I could tell you that that's a rare story and that we're not getting a lot of input about that, but we are. This Obamacare disaster is really starting to take its toll. I think it's unconscionable, by the way, that the majority here seeks to distract the focus of this body on these important things like Obamacare by pulling this stunt on the judges. But what it doesn't stop is the wave of letters that we're now getting from people all across the country. These letters, these aren't talking points. These aren't complex policy analysis. These aren't op-eds in newspapers. These are the letters from real people that are being impacted in real ways by this law. And I want to share with you some of their stories. I'm going to leave their last names out to protect their privacy, but I want to share with you some of these examples because these are very typical of the kinds of things that we're hearing about all across the country. Philip in Winter Springs. Philip is retired. He's living on a fixed income with insurance from United Healthcare that he has for himself and for his wife. His monthly premium increased from $530 to $867. That's over a 60% increase in his monthly premium, and his $15 copay has doubled now to $30. How about Charles in Winter Garden? Charles had employer-provided health care, which Obamacare caused to spike in price, nearly 80% more for his plan, and his deductible is $12,000. $12,000, okay? Can't afford $156 a week for health insurance if he wants to be able to provide for his 2 children and pay his bills. Here's one from Janet in Titusville. Janet is a single mom who's losing insurance for herself and for her children in January. This isn't Janet's first challenge with the economy, by the way. She's been unemployed for 3 years, and she took an underemployed job to provide for insurance for her kids, but only to lose it a year later. She just wants insurance that doesn't cost nearly 10% of her income so she can provide for her kids. David in Lakewood Ranch, he has an insurance plan that will be canceled as of April 1st, 2014. His current policy costs him about $291 a month with a $6,000 deductible. The new policy his insurance company suggested raises his monthly premium over 60% to $466 with a $12,000 deductible as well. Now, David also looked at the silver plan through the exchanges, but the monthly cost would be $525 with a $7,500 deductible. David's other problem, by the way, is that if he waits until his current plan is canceled on April 1st, 2014, any of the costs he had leading up to his deductible did not count in the new policy. So he'll be spending even more trying to reach a deductible that will increase along with his much higher monthly premiums. As he wrote in our office, I just want my old plan back. Colleen in Winter Garden. Colleen is self-employed. She chose to have a plan that costs her $60 a month because that's all she can afford. She says that while she knows if she had to use her policy there would be hospital costs, she's more than willing to accept the risk. Well, guess what? Her policy's been canceled. The new option is a $600 a month plan, and there is no way she can afford that plan. There's no way she can afford it. How about Sarah in Live Oak? Sarah had an individual policy for herself with a $2,000 deductible that ran $68 per month. Her plan's been canceled, and now she's looking at a $288 a month plan with a $5,000 deductible. She feels as she's been lied to by the President and by Congress, and who can blame her for feeling that way? How about Warren in Sanford? Warren had a health insurance for his family, his 4 members of his family, with a monthly premium of $533 and a $10,000 deductible. While he would have preferred a lower deductible because his family is healthy and he was willing to take that risk, now that plan is gone. So Warren went on the exchanges to look for a new policy. His new monthly price was $1,300, more than double his old plan, with a $13,000 deductible. As Warren noted, the bottom line is, quote, this is a quote from Warren, the bottom line is, I will be paying more and I will be getting less. And he'll be forced to do things like skip vacations or miss out on his children's activities. Then there's Joe in Melbourne's Beach. Joe had a health care plan that was canceled because of Obamacare. He liked this plan. He told our office that he took great care in selecting my plan that I felt was right for me and for my needs. Now he has to shop for a new plan, and all he sees are more expensive options. He tried the Obamacare website, but it didn't work for him. And on top of the website not working, he's nervous about security risks when it comes to submitting his information to these websites. There's Kenneth in Land O'Lakes. He and his wife had a private insurance plan for over 11 years, but they don't anymore. They received a letter in the mail canceling their plan, telling them that due to the recent ACA legislation, this policy is no longer available. The new option that is available to him, by the way, is from an insurance company that had a premium that was double the price of his current plan. $2,400 more a year. He doesn't know how he's going to cover this additional expense. Look, I don't think anyone disputes that we have a health insurance problem in America. But this is a disaster. Of course they want to do this judge thing here. Of course they want to trigger some sort of fight about judges and the Republicans objecting to judges and nominees. If you have supported this, if you have voted for the law that does this to people, you don't want to talk about this. If you are responsible for the passage of this law, if you've gone around the last 2 years bragging about this law, if you're the one that went around telling people if you have a policy you like, you can keep it, why would you ever want the world focused on this? The problem is people are going to be focused on this because this is no longer a theory. Obamacare is no longer some theoretical thing that's going to happen at some point in the future to someone else. Obamacare is happening to real people right now. Right now. All over this country, people are feeling these impacts. These are real people. This is not some outside third-party group running a commercial. This is not someone here giving a speech about what they think is going to happen. This is what's happening now, and there's going to be more of these. And it's going to impact Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals, red states, blue states. Everyone is going to be impacted by this. They already are being impacted by this. This is going to have a dramatically negative impact on our economy, on our people, and on our country as a whole. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have a health insurance issue that shouldn't be addressed. And we could have addressed it, and we still can. By, for example, giving people more options in a truly vibrant, private, personal marketplace. Allow people to buy insurance from any company in America that will sell it to you. Allow people to buy it with money that isn't taxed, just like when your employer buys it for you. Incentivize, encourage people, make it easier for people. Quite frankly, make it more rewarding and more flexible to put money in a health savings account so you can have that tax-free money that you can use to pay your deductible, to pay your co-payments, to pay out of pocket, to pay for your kids' braces. These are real options that are available to us, none of which were pursued. Instead of what was pursued is this big government solution, this one-size-fits-all plan rammed down the throat of the American people, just like these judges are being rammed down our throat, just like the nominee tonight is being rammed down our throat. Because when what you stand for cannot withstand scrutiny, when you have a judge like the one before us tonight that's so outside the mainstream, you don't want a process that examines their record and requires consensus. You've got to ram it through. And when you have a law that so fundamentally alters the makeup of American health care, you don't want this thing being analyzed. You've got to ram it through. They did it on Obamacare, and they're doing it on judges. There's a reason why our republic was set up this way. There's a reason why the system of checks and balances was set up this way. There's a reason why the Senate was built this way, with people that serve 6-year terms, 2 per state, because they wanted a chamber that would slow things down and look at them carefully and weigh them. But you can't do that when you're changing the rules to ram things through. What you're going to get are radical lifetime appointments to the bench, like what we're on the verge of doing here tonight in this Senate. And what you get are these damaging changes to the law on health care, which leave people with less choices, with more expenses, and here's the kicker, with less access to the quality health care that's second to none in the United States. We have the best health providers in the world. When rich and powerful people around this planet get sick, you know where they come? They come to the United States. They come to our centers of excellence. Other places around the world have quality places like that too, but they're only available for people that can afford to pay out of pocket. Their government-run insurance programs don't allow you to do that. They socialize you. They force you to wait in line behind other people until your turn is up. The only people that can go straight to the front and get the highest quality health care in many places on earth are the richest people in those countries that can afford to pay for it out of their pocket. And you know what? This law brings us a little bit closer to that. Because many of these quality providers, the Sloan Ketterlings, the MD Andersons, these extraordinary high-quality care centers, the Mayo Clinics, many of them aren't on any of these insurance plans anymore. In order to fit within the framework of Obamacare, you've got to cut those people out of the plan. And so we head closer to the day when the only people that will be able to go to these centers are people who can afford to pay for it out of their pocket. And everybody else, people on Obamacare, you're just going to get whatever the plan covers. That's what you're stuck with. That's what we're headed towards. We're going to deny the American people access to the highest quality health care system in the history of the world. Not the best health insurance marketplace. There's reforms that need to happen there. But quality-wise, second to none. We're going to deny people access to that. The other reason, by the way, why this whole debate on judges is really bad for the country is it distracts us from the fundamental issue of our time, by the central issue that faces our people and our country. It's one that I wish we spent more time focused on around here. And I think both parties are a little bit guilty of not focusing on it enough. When I was a child, when I was younger, I had all kinds of ideas about what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I was blessed with parents who taught me that every single one of these dreams were within my reach. From my earliest memories, my parents instilled in me the belief that even though my family wasn't rich or powerful or connected, I could grow up to be anything I set my mind to, because I was an American. My parents knew America was special because they knew what life was like outside of it. See, my parents were born into a society like most people are born into, where the success you're going to have in life is often predetermined by the family you were born into. But by the grace of God, my parents were able to come here to the one place on earth where that isn't true. And the promise of America changed their lives. Now look, my parents never made it big. My mother worked as a cashier and a hotel maid and even a stock clerk at Kmart. My dad was a bartender, primarily working banquets. But you know that through hard work and determination, my parents made it to the middle class. And they gave us, their children, the opportunity to do all the things they never were able to do, to be anything we wanted to be. They were never rich, like I said, but my parents achieved the American dream. That phrase, the American dream, that's a phrase we use all the time. But you know, it's a phrase that's often misunderstood. The American dream has never been about becoming wealthy or famous. Instead, it's about things that, quite frankly, I think many of us, like me, who were born and raised here our whole life, it's about things that I think we sometimes take for granted. The American dream, what is it about? It's about a happy and stable home life, where you can live without fear for your safety or the safety of your family. It's about the freedom to worship any way you want. It's about having the chance to get a good education and find a job that rewards hard work with financial security. The American dream is about being able to send your kids to college and to be able to retire comfortably. About the opportunity to pursue happiness without being limited by your social status or your background. And perhaps most of all, the American dream is about being able to give your kids the chance and the opportunities that you yourself never had. This is the true American dream. It isn't just a phrase. It's our identity as a nation. It's what it means to be an American. Now look, we're still a country where the American dream is possible. We're still a place where if you work hard and are determined, you can earn a better life. But we have to be honest. Over the last 10 years, it's gotten harder to achieve this. It's gotten harder to find a good job and get ahead financially. It's gotten harder to save for retirement and send your kids to college. It's gotten harder to pay for health care, for child care, for the monthly payments on your student loan. Now, for the last 5 years, we have been told that a bigger government that does more and spends more is the answer to this problem. But you know what that's left us with instead? With about $17 trillion in debt and millions of Americans chronically out of work. And so the result is that despite all this news that we get from time to time about how the economy is getting better or the stock market is climbing, for many, many people across this country, there's a sense that that recovery isn't reaching them. And this is creating true uncertainty and even fear about the future. There's the constant worry that you could lose everything you worked so hard for. The doubts about whether you'll ever be able to make enough to have a few extra dollars after payday or be able to save for the future. And even, by the way, for those who are enjoying the life they always wanted, you know what you find? A growing sense that their children may not get that same chance. And so it's not surprising that some are starting to wonder whether the time has come for us to lower our expectations, that maybe the time has come to downgrade the American dream. This doesn't have to be the new normal. We have a choice in this. If we go in a new direction that gives us a government that creates less debt, an economy that creates more stable middle-class jobs, an education system that trains our people for the jobs available now and in the future, strong families that teach the values of success, and a financially healthy Social Security and Medicare system for retirees, if we are responsible enough to courageously and boldly fight to do these things, we can save the American dream. We can restore it. Actually, we can expand it to reach more people than it's ever reached before. Now, our first priority here should not be ramming through rules changes to get liberal judges appointed. Our first priority here should be more stable middle-class jobs. That should be our first priority, because stable middle-class jobs are the cornerstone of the American dream. And let me break it to everybody here in Washington. Politicians don't create jobs. Politicians don't create these stable middle-class jobs. These stable middle-class jobs are created by everyday people when they start a business or when they grow an existing one. That, my friends, is the reason why the American free enterprise system is the single greatest engine of prosperity that the world has ever known. The key to our success as a country has always been a thriving free enterprise system, not a thriving bigger government. What we need from our government are policies that foster a free enterprise system, that provide opportunities for everyone that is willing to work hard. A government that stops spending money it doesn't have. Our $17 trillion debt, we have got to bring this thing under control. We need to address a broken tax code. We need one that creates more taxpayers, not more taxes. The current one we have is a major obstacle to the American dream. Why? Because our current tax code is expensive, it's complicated. Our current tax code, it is rigged. It is rigged to help those who are politically connected. And it is rigged to help them at the expense of everybody else. We need to reform the runaway regulations that we have. It's destroying job creation. And by the way, it too favors the well-connected. It too favors the people who can afford to hire lobbyists to help write these rules and lawyers to help figure out the loopholes. We need government policies that remove unreasonable restrictions on energy exploration here in this country so that we can be freed from a dependence on foreign oil, so that we can create more jobs in the energy sector, but also in manufacturing. And as I mentioned earlier, we do need to get the cost of health care under control, but not through the big government solutions like Obamacare that were rammed down the throat of the American people, but by encouraging the development of an individual health insurance market that gives people more choices, not more mandates. You know, but the middle-class jobs of today and of the future, they're going to require more education and skills than ever before. That's why one of the most important investments of our time and our resources that we could possibly make here, instead of wasting time on all these distractions about changing the Senate rules to force through radical judges like the one being proposed here tonight, one of the most important investments we can make is in a quality and affordable education system that gives our people the unique skills they're going to need to succeed in a new global economy. To do that, we need to take power out of the hands of Washington, D.C., and give it to the state and local school boards so they can undertake innovative reforms. We need to pursue policies that expand access and interest in science, technology, engineering, and math, because that's where the jobs of the future are going to be based on. As I mentioned a moment ago, we need to get the cost of college under control. I know. I graduated with over $100,000 in student loans. We need to give working Americans trapped in low-paying jobs access to college or career education that's affordable and that's flexible so that it meets within their already busy lives. If you are a working parent, particularly a working single parent, you can't just quit your job and move to the nearest college town to go to school for 4 years. We've got to create programs. We've got to reform our existing programs so that they're accessible and affordable for people who are in this position, so that the receptionist at a law firm can become a paralegal, so that the mail clerk at a medical office can become an ultrasound technician. We've got to meet this issue. It's an extraordinary need. By the way, we have to give all of our students more access to career and vocational education. You can still make a good middle-class living as an airplane mechanic, as an electrician. Why have we stigmatized these things? Why have we told children in this country that if they go into these fields, they're not successful? These are good, stable, necessary middle-class jobs. And you know what happens when a kid wants to work with their hands, but they're not learning it in high school? They drop out. We have got to address that, not just at the federal level, but across the country. By the way, in addition to a good education, the American dream was built on a set of fundamental values like hard work, discipline, honesty, self-control. Now, teaching these values, it's the responsibility of our families. Government can't impose these values, and it, quite frankly, can't teach them. But government policy should encourage and reward them. That's why I think we should empower parents by giving them the ability to send their kids to any school they choose. There is no reason why a parent should not be able to put their kids in the best possible education setting just because they're poor. There's no reason why we should force people to send their kids into failing schools just because that happens to be the school that's right down the street. That isn't fair. If you are rich, you can send your kids to any school you want, and you know what? They do. You know who can't do that? The people who can't afford to pay for that. That's wrong, and we should change it. We should strengthen our charities and our churches, which make an extraordinary contribution in helping the less fortunate and in reinforcing these values so important to success. We should reinforce them by making important changes to our tax code that will encourage and reward Americans for donating more. And we need to have safety net programs. The free enterprise system doesn't work. without a solid safety net, but a safety net that helps people who cannot help themselves, and a safety net to help people who have fallen to get back up and try again, not a safety net that's a way of life. We need to reform our existing safety net programs. Welfare, unemployment insurance, disability, Medicaid, they should all be reformed so that in addition to providing for the needs of those in need, these programs should also be promoting work and education and self-reliance. Last but not least, the American dream, I think, means the ability to retire with stability and security. And that's why having a financially healthy Social Security and Medicare system is so important. Now, we can bicker around here all we want about how many votes it takes to get a judge in, who's obstructing what. Here's a fundamental fact, a fact. Social Security is going to run out of money in 20 years, which happens to be right around the time that I'm getting close to being eligible for it. Medicare is going to run out of money in about as few as 8. The good news is that if we act now, if we start to take steps to address that now, we can fix these programs, and we can fix them without disrupting the lives of people that are on those programs now, like my mother. I would never support any changes to these programs that would hurt people like my mother who's on Social Security and Medicare. And we can fix it. But to fix it, people like me, decades from retirement, we're going to have to accept that while our Medicare and Social Security will be the best thing in the world, it's going to be different than our parents. But it's going to exist. Beyond this, by the way, I think we should do some other things. We should make it easier through changes in our taxes. We should make it easier for people to continue to work beyond their retirement years. And we should expand access to tax-advantaged savings accounts for those who don't have an access to a 401k. We should incentivize people to save for their retirement. I think what bothers me the most in the 3 years that I've been here is the lack of urgency about any of this. People talk about it. They propose laws called good things that maybe they've polled and it sounds good. But in terms of moving on any of these things I've just talked about, there isn't a lot of urgency about it. We need to have more urgency about it. We need to stop wasting time around here changing the rules of the Senate to get a couple more of the President's radical appointments to the bench confirmed and spend a little bit more time figuring this out. You know, for most of the history of the world, almost everyone that was born was poor, without power, without wealth. That only belonged to a select few. For most of the history of the world, the people that have been born, your future was determined by your past. If your parents were poor, so would you be. If you were born without opportunity, so were your children. What makes our country special is that that hasn't been true here. What makes America special is we're a people not united by a common race or a common ethnicity. We're a people united by a common value. The idea that everyone has the God-given right to achieve a better life without being held back by your government or by your social standing. Now look, right now I work here. Washington is broken. It was broken when I got here and it still is. It's a process that's unable to function. With all due respect, it is a process that is plagued with people in both parties, by the way, who are more interested in being someone than in doing something. And I'm telling you that if we continue on this road that we are on right now, if we continue on the road that we have placed this country on, we are going to lose the things that makes America special. And that's what we should be focused on. Because there's another direction we can take. If we can find the political courage to boldly and responsibly confront and solve the challenges before us, we can restore the American dream. Actually, we can expand it to reach more people than it ever has before. Every generation of American before us has had to do this. Every generation before us has been asked to do something to keep America special. Each has been asked to make sacrifices and take bold steps to preserve what makes us exceptional. And now it's our turn. I remember a few years ago, there was a moment that reminded me of what's truly at stake here, and I've shared this story many times. I was about to give a speech in a hotel ballroom, I think it was in New York City. And there was a bartender working there who had heard me speak before about my father, who was also a bartender. And he approached me with a gift. The gift he gave me was a name tag that said Rubio, banquet bartender. The name tag like they give in the hotels. At that moment, I was reminded of how this country had literally changed my family's very life. How not so long ago it was my father who had stood behind a bar just like the one that gentleman stood behind in order to give me the chance to earn a better life. And how America made that possible. It was never easy. Both my parents worked well into their retirement years. I remember when I was in high school, well past midnight on many nights, I would hear my father's keys jingling at the door as he came home from another long day of work. When you're young, the meaning of moments like that, they just escape you. But now as I get older and my children get older, I think I understand that moment a little bit better. Because like the man who gave me that name tag that night in New York, my father was coming back from more than just another day at work. He was coming back from a day of fighting so that the doors that had closed for him would be open for me. This is still one of the few places on earth where you can do that. That's what makes us special. And now before us is the question of whether this generation of leadership is up to the task of keeping this country that way. I don't personally have any doubt that we are up to the task. You know, despite our many differences, I believe our people are much more united than the policies and than our politics would lead you to believe. Every single one of us, every single American, is the descendant of a go-getter, of an immigrant or of a slave, of someone that overcame extraordinary odds to stake their claim in this American dream. Every single one of us comes from someone who refused to accept the life they lived and always desired to have something better for themselves and for their families. Every single one of us is a descendant of someone who insisted that their future must always be better than their past. This is who we are as a people. This is who we come from. And I believe that's still who we are. All we need now are leaders that reflect that in their policies and in their priorities. So, I still have more faith in this country than perhaps the political coverage might lead you to have. Because, look, we're free people. And that means we're always going to vigorously debate the best way forward. And sometimes, because of the nature of our republic, it takes us a little longer to get it right. But we always have. And I believe we will again. Because in the end, there's no such thing as the Republican dream or the Democrat dream. There's only an American dream. And despite all the challenges this country faces, and despite some of the skirmishes on the floor of the Senate, unnecessary sometimes, like this thing with the judges and the rule change, despite all of that, I know for a fundamental fact that the American people are not willing or prepared to give up on this American dream. But that requires us to act. That requires us to stop wasting time around here and focus on these things. Because we have this golden opportunity to restore this American dream and to bring it within reach of more people than ever before. We have an opportunity before us to claim our heritage as a people who always leave behind a nation better than the one that was left for them. We have a chance to usher in a new American century and to write this latest chapter in the story of the single greatest nation that man has ever known. And so I hope as we conclude these debates on issues such as this, we will somehow find a way to begin to work together on the things that really matter, on the things of importance, on the things that impact Americans now and those yet to come. Which leads me to one final point, because I see my colleague is here from Wisconsin as well as others who may wish to speak in a moment. I just want to close with one more point, one more issue that I think we're being distracted from because of the silliness of breaking the rules to change the rules so we can impose on the American people out of the mainstream judges and cabinet appointments that are less than qualified. And that's the issue of American leadership in the world. Look around the world today. Look at the impact of uncertainty about our foreign policy and what it's having across the planet. And on this front, I'm going to be honest right there, it's straightforward about this one, especially. This is an issue for both parties to reflect on for a moment. Now, we all understand that, and we should be, we're wary of international engagement. We've gone through a decade of two conflicts in the Middle East. You turn on the television and you see people that we've spent money and sacrificed lives on behalf of, burning our flag and celebrating our tragedies, and you wonder, why are we involved in the world? Why are we engaged in these places? But I hope everybody understands that in the absence of American leadership, a vacuum is created. And that vacuum leads to chaos. And chaos ultimately impacts our national security and our economic well-being. Take a brief tour around the world with me for a moment, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Turn on the news and see what's happening in Ukraine, with a country being increasingly intimidated into going back into basically what looks like an effort to reconstitute the former Soviet Union, being torn between that and choosing modernization in the West with the European Union. People in the streets protesting against that, and riot police going in there to force them out. Look at the Middle East, where Iran proceeds all full speed ahead towards weaponizing, towards creating a nuclear weapon. And the impact that would have, not just on arming the one country in the world that most uses terrorism as a tool of statecraft. We had testimony today from the administration. No country in the world uses terrorism more than Iran does. And they're going to get a nuclear weapon? And it won't just be Iran getting a nuclear weapon. If Iran gets a weapon, so will Saudi Arabia and potentially Turkey. Look at what's happening in Asia. The Chinese have announced that a certain area now belongs to them in their airspace, that you have to get permission from them and notify them before you fly through there. And our allies in the region, South Korea and Japan and others, they're starting to wonder whether America will live up to its commitments to provide for their defense and to assist them. Or maybe they need to strike out on their own and provide their own defense capabilities. Look at the opportunities in the Western Hemisphere that we've abandoned because we've taken our focus off of it. I could go on and on. Are we a strong enough voice on behalf of religious liberties? Meanwhile, religious minorities around the world are being oppressed in unprecedented ways. In particular, Christians in the Middle East are facing persecution that's reminiscent of the early days of the church. How about human rights? How about human trafficking and modern-day slavery? All these things require American leadership. We can't solve every problem. Foreign aid isn't charity. It needs to further our national interests, and it needs to be accountably spent. But this is something we should be focused on more, and we're not. Why? Because we continue to get involved in these sort of skirmishes here, and in particular, undermining the ability of this body to function by changing the rules, by breaking them. And so I hope that this will serve as an opportunity to reevaluate all of this, because the challenges before our country are real, and the consequences of not acting appropriately are dramatic. And I hope that we'll take this seriously, because we still have time to get this right, but we do not have forever. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business for up to 20 minutes?
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, this is the 52nd consecutive week we're in session that I have come to the floor to ask us, please, for Lord's sake, to wake up to the damage carbon pollution is already doing to our atmosphere, oceans, and climate, and to look ahead, to use our God-given sense, and to plan for what is so obviously coming. In those weeks, I've talked about all different aspects of carbon pollution, its effect on sports and our economy, its effect on oceans and coasts, its effect on agriculture and wildfires, its effect on storms and insurance costs. I've talked about the measurements we can already make of the harm already happening. Sea level rise, which you measure with a yardstick, basically. Ocean temperature, which you measure with a thermometer. And ocean acidification, the fastest in 50 million years, according to research published in Nature Geoscience, which you can measure with litmus tests. I have, I hope, to anyone listening with their logic turned on, thoroughly rebutted the deniers' phony arguments against solving carbon pollution, whether those arguments purported to be based in science or religion or economics or our competitiveness. I have listed the thoughtful and responsible groups, from the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, from Walmart to NASA, from Ford and GM to Coke and Pepsi, from America's Garden Clubs to just last month our major sports leagues, who understand the truth about climate change and are saying so. I've done my best to expose the calculated campaign of lies that we're up against and the vast, scandalous apparatus of phony organizations and engineered messages that are designed to propagate those lies. I've traced the connections back to, of course, the big carbon polluters and their billionaire owners. And I've been obliged to point out that the money of those big polluters and billionaires floods this chamber, that their lobbyists prowl the outer halls, and that to a sad and disappointing degree this Congress is bought and paid for by that polluter influence. One factor we have yet to consider is whether, as an institution, Congress has just become completely irresponsible. Maybe this Congress just can't operate as an institution at an intelligent level. Some Congresses are going to be smarter and more responsible than others. That's just the natural order of variation. Some Congress is going to be the sorriest Congress ever. Maybe we're it. Some organizations, like NASA, for instance, are very smart. That's why NASA is driving a rover around on the surface of Mars right now. That is a seriously smart organization. Some organizations take ordinary people and call them to be their very best, to play at a level above their natural talents, to heed a higher calling than their selfish inclinations. At their best, our military and our churches tend to achieve that. Some organizations, however, take even the most talented people and drag them down to the lowest common denominator and stifle the best and bring out the worst in even those very talented people. Well, I ask people watching, which type of organization do you think Congress is right now? Which type do you think we are? As an organization, it is hard to say anything kinder of Congress than that it is now a really irresponsible organization. We couldn't even keep the United States government running. Standard & Poor's estimated that our Tea Party shutdown foolishness cost Americans tens of billions of dollars for no gain, none. We can't sort out the basics of building and maintaining our American infrastructure. Our own American Society of Civil Engineers gives our country a D+ for infrastructure. And that's not complicated stuff. Yet we flub it like a football team that fumbles the ball at the snap. Get a little more complicated, and Congress seems to get even worse. Let me show you just one health care chart. This chart shows the average life expectancy in years of a country compared to the cost per capita of health care in that country. Together, they make a pretty good proxy for how a country's health care system is doing. This group here represents most of the OECD member and partner countries, our industrialized international competitors. This is us, way out here, all alone, spending the most by far for results that are mediocre at best. We would save nearly $1 trillion a year if we could just get our per capita cost down to what Norway and Switzerland spend. They're the next two most expensive countries on the planet, and we are $1 trillion a year more laid out per capita. Think of what we could do as a nation, what we could build and invent with $1 trillion a year if we weren't wasting it on bad health care. And bad it is. We get worse results in longevity than virtually any modern economy. Look who beats us. Japan, Great Britain, Switzerland, Netherlands, Norway. Germany does, Italy does, Greece does, Luxembourg does. They all beat us. Chile and the Czech Republic are the two countries we beat for longevity. Look at the size of that problem. Those lives lost, those trillions of dollars wasted, and then look at the quality of the health care discussion we are having in Congress and tell me that this is not a completely irresponsible organization. And that brings us to climate change. Yeah, it's complicated when you're trying to predict and model something as complex as what our climate is going to do in the years ahead. But it is also simple. When you look at the stuff that everyone agrees on the stuff that you can measure, the stuff that you'd have to be a nut or a crank or an eccentric to dispute. Nobody responsible disputes the principle that adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere raises the temperature of the Earth. and that it does so through the so-called greenhouse effect. A scientist named John Tyndall figured that out at the time of the American Civil War. I brought his musty old paper in here several speeches ago. Its old leather binding was flaking and peeling. When that report was first published, Abraham Lincoln had just been elected president. In all the years since then, this principle of science has always been confirmed and validated. It is not some questionable theory. The greenhouse effect is real. It would not just be wrong, it would be irresponsible to deny that. Nobody responsible disputes that for over a century our modern economy has run on fossil fuels and that burning those fossil fuels has released gigatons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The Global Carbon Project estimates that mankind has pumped about 2,000 gigatons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere since 1870. That's a pretty solid estimate, and I've never even heard anyone dispute it. So we know those two things. Adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere traps more heat, and we have released an estimated 2,000 gigatons, 2,000 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Let's go on from there. It is a known principle of science that a significant portion of that multi-gigaton carbon load is absorbed by the oceans, and that the chemical reaction when that absorption happens into the oceans makes the oceans more acidic. No responsible person disputes either proposition. It's not some theory. It's something that you can actually do and measure in a lab. Again, it wouldn't just be wrong, it would be really irresponsible to deny that. We also know that the oceans do more than absorb carbon. They absorb heat. Indeed, they have absorbed most of the excess heat trapped by greenhouse gases. Over 90% of the heat between 1971 and 2010, according to the recent IPCC report. And what happens when the oceans absorb heat? They expand. Thermal expansion is a basic physical property of liquids. It can also be shown in a very simple lab. It is not a theory. Again, it would be not just wrong, but irresponsible to deny that, too. It would not just be wrong, it would be irresponsible to deny what those simple measurements and clear principles tell us. But we do. We do. We deny it. Congress won't wake up and address this problem. Like those monkeys, see no carbon, hear no carbon, speak no carbon. Because we are so irresponsible, because we deny this reality, we are failing to take precautions, and as a result, many people will suffer. For those of us who love this country and are proud of it, and are proud of our government, and want this country and its government to be a beacon of hope and promise and rectitude, it hurts a little extra for the United States Congress to be such a failure. It hurts a little extra that we in our generation have driven Congress, the hub of our noble American experiment in democracy, the beating heart of this great republic, down to that low level. It is a harsh judgment that this body is an irresponsible failure. But on climate, this Congress got it the old-fashioned way. It earned it. I will close with a final observation. Compare the irresponsibility of this see no carbon, hear no carbon, speak no carbon Congress with the recent exhortation from Pope Francis. Here is what the Pope said. I'll quote him at some length. There are other weak and defenseless beings who are frequently at the mercy of economic interests or indiscriminate exploitation. I am speaking of creation as a whole. We human beings are not only the beneficiaries, but also the stewards of other creatures. Thanks to our bodies, God has joined us so closely to the world around us that we can feel the desertification of the soil almost as a physical ailment, and the extinction of a species as a painful disfigurement. Let us not leave in our wake a swath of destruction and death which will affect our own lives and those of future generations. Here I would make my own, the Pope continued, the touching and prophetic lament voiced some years ago by the bishops of the Philippines. And he quotes them. An incredible variety of insects lived in the forest and were busy with all kinds of tasks. Birds flew through the air, their bright plumes and varying calls adding color and song to the green of the forest. God intended this land for us, his special creatures, but not so that we might destroy it and turn it into a wasteland. After a single night's rain, look at the chocolate-brown rivers in your locality and remember that they are carrying the lifeblood of the land into the sea. How can fish swim in sewers like the rivers which we have polluted? Who has turned the wonder world of the seas into underwater cemeteries bereft of color and life? Small yet strong in the love of God, like St. Francis of Assisi, all of us as Christians are called to watch over and protect the fragile world in which we live and all its peoples. End quote. What is our answer to the Pope, to this great Christian leader? In Congress, it's the monkey answer. Hear no carbon, see no carbon, speak no carbon. We still have time to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. We can actually do it in painless ways. We can even do it in advantageous ways, in ways that will boost our economy. But we have got to do it. We have got to wake up. We simply have got to wake up. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wisconsin.
I rise to address the nomination of Cornelia Pillard for the D.C. Circuit. This nomination is a good example of the government overreach that has led to the Obamacare debacle.